My name is Callie Wynn, and I am the graduate assistant for on-campus events and civic engagement at Hofstra's Center for Civic Engagement. The Center for Civic Engagement is a diverse group on Hofstra's campus that works every day to encourage active citizenship in our students. Our undergraduate fellows have the opportunity to work on events like the one you're here for today, where we bring in knowledgeable folks to discuss important issues. They also have the opportunity to work directly with the community through our system of community partnerships. If you're a current Hofstra undergraduate and interested in working with us next semester, please feel free to reach out to me directly for more information. And Lauren, if you could add my email to the chat, that would be helpful. So today's events couldn't be possible without the help of a lot of folks. I would like to start by thanking our fellows for the hours of hard work they put into planning these panels. Your dedication does not go unnoticed. We also benefit in various ways from the support of the Office of the Provost. Logistically, I must thank the Office of University Relations and specifically Executive Director of the Hofstra Cultural Center, Athleen Collins. She has devoted countless hours to the center in our events this year, and I'm personally grateful for her ongoing guidance and leadership. I would also like to thank CCE's board for their continued support of the center and our initiatives. Finally, I would like to thank my co-GA, Gabby Rojas, and our director, Dr. Philip Dalton, for their support and guidance. Now I will pass my virtual mic over to Lauren, one of our amazing undergraduate fellows, to tell you a little bit more about this panel.
Hi, everyone. Just to reiterate, Callie, I want to thank everyone for coming. Say good morning. I'm Lauren Ballinger, and I'll be your moderator for the beginning of this event. I want to thank Callie for that lovely description for CCE and for orchestrating Earth Day. We have 2 more panels, one on climate change and migration right after this at 1, and another on sustainable housing at 4:20. So please be sure to check those out later today. You can register at events.hofstra.edu, but I will also drop that link in the chat. I also want to thank my other fellows, Michaela, Jenna, and Antonia, who helped plan this event. Antonia will be moderating this event too, and Michaela and Jenna will be monitoring the chat and helping us along during the Q&A portion of the event. During this event, we want to encourage audience participation and encourage you to ask questions. You can either type them in the chat as they arise, individually message one of the fellows, or raise your hand during the Q&A portion of the event. In hosting this event, we want to provide a platform for local and national organizers to communicate with us as audience members as to how we can get involved and learn about environmental activism. We want to make a space where all feel comfortable asking questions, so please ask your questions, any that you may have. Lastly, of course, I want to thank the panelists that have joined us today. So we have Annalisa Pena, Paige Swinnerton, and Annabelle Hoffman from Leaders for Environmental Action and Fellowship on campus, LEAF for short. They're a student-run group that promotes the preservation of the environment while taking action to reverse the damage that has already taken place on Earth. We also have Ashley Hunt Mortono. She's the marketing manager of the National Organization of the Citizens Climate Lobby and co-founder and co-leader of the CCL Long Island chapter. So thank you for being here. And lastly, we have Nina Agarwal Hardin. She is an 18-year-old climate organizer based in Ann Arbor, Michigan. She works locally and nationally with the Sunrise Movement to stop climate change and create millions of good jobs in the process. She's a co-founder of the Sunrise's National Middle and High School Support Team, which has trained hundreds of teenagers to take action against the climate crisis. She also works with Sunrise's National Partnership and Political Team. She has been published and featured in USA Today, Teen Vogue, Al Jazeera, The Guardian, and more. So if we just want to go down the line and you guys can tell us a bit in your words what your organization does. If we want to start with LEAF, and then we can move to Citizens Climate Lobby and then the Sunrise Movement.
Well, hi, I'm Annalisa. This is Paige.
I'm Paige.
Annabelle, shout out real fast.
Hi.
I'm the president. Paige is a PR person. Annabelle is the treasurer for Hofstra LEAF. And I mean, she got it right on point with the little bio, but we are Hofstra's environmental club, and we were founded about, I want to say like a year and a half ago, around there.
Around there.
Our history is a little bit shaky, but in the beginning, the people before us had a club that was, I think it was like called Sustainability or something like that. And we came in as freshmen and we were like, we want an environmental club, let's start one. And so we tried to get it started and found out that it was already sort of in the works. So then we worked with them and got it actually recognized. And then we hopped on the e-board this year, and it's been an amazing experience. What we do is that we focus a lot on education, and it's always catered to whatever the members want to talk about, and it's all within the means of environmentalism. We also, before the pandemic, did a lot of in-person activism. So we went to demonstrations and protests and stuff like that. And with the pandemic, we sort of moved that to online education and online, protesting and stuff like that. But yeah, that's the little gist of our club. Anything I missed?
No, I think you got everything.
Okay.
Thank you so much. We'll move to Ashley now.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for being here today. I'm really excited to spend part of Earth Day with you. And thanks to the fellow panelists for the work that you're doing. It's very important to have local clubs on campus. I was part of many clubs when I was in college. And our organization works with Sunrise Movement across the country. Our local chapters partner with Sunrise Movement. So we are big fans of the work that they're doing. So Citizens Climate Lobby is a nonpartisan grassroots organization focused on passing federal climate legislation. And we're organized into hundreds of local chapters across the US. We have about 500 in the US and about 100 chapters around the world, including some chapters in India, Japan, Bangladesh, all over Europe, Australia. And so these chapters try and build political support for climate action with a variety of tools, which they use in keeping with the local culture and politics of their community. And by focusing on shared values rather than partisan divides, we build relationships with community leaders and federal elected officials within Congress. And we always start with from a place of respect, gratitude, and appreciation when we're working with Congress. And specifically, we teach tens of thousands of volunteers things like how to hold a lobby meeting with an elected official, how to write a letter to the editor of your local newspaper to try and bring awareness to climate change and climate policies in local, state, and federal government, how to give public presentations on climate change like this. So right now, we have two major campaigns going on. One is writing postcards to President Biden using the My Postcard app on your phone to upload a photo of you in a meaningful place like a beach or park you love with a personal message from you on the back of the postcard asking him to pass carbon pricing legislation. And so if you sign up using our link, which I can post in the chat, you can get a free $3 credit to send your postcard to the president. And we're doing this in honor of Earth Day because, as a lot of you probably know, President Biden is going to be giving a major speech today about climate policy. And so all the details are at cclusa.org/postcard-help. And we've sent about 800 postcards so far. We're just trying to slam the White House mailroom with lots of climate postcards. The second big campaign that we have going on right now is emailing our members of Congress to ask them to sponsor the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act, which I'll talk about in a few minutes when we get into the policy discussion. But so far for Long Island reps, Tom Swazi and Grace Ming are both co-sponsors of this bill. So if you live in their districts, send them a thank you email because we want to encourage members of Congress when they're doing the right thing to keep doing the right thing. And if you're in other districts like Rep. Zeldin or Garbarino or Rice or Meeks or others, please send them an email through our website to ask them to co-sponsor this legislation, which I'll talk about in more detail. And we have tools on our website to help you write effective emails, or if you want to make a phone call to your reps.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Now, Naina, if you want to talk to us a little bit about Sunrise Movement.
Yeah, happy to. It's a real honor and pleasure to spend part of Earth Day with you all here today. And Sunrise was founded back in 2017 by a group of young people who had come from all different corners of the climate movement. Some were working on campus divestment, others were working on infrastructure fights and frontline fights, others were working on like climate finance and getting banks and insurance companies to divest. And there was just a whole bunch of different perspectives in the room, but everybody shared the conviction that the climate movement was really kind of failing to bring in enough people to build the popular movement needed to combat the climate crisis, and was also failing to bring in a diverse enough crowd of like Black people and Indigenous people and people who are on the front lines of the crisis. So Sunrise was founded with that in mind, and it was it was kind of a departure from a lot of what had been done in the climate movement in the past. So Sunrise in a nutshell is, like Lauren said, fighting to stop climate change and create millions of good jobs in the process. It's a youth-led movement with 400 or 500 hubs all over the country. And Sunrise's central fight is the fight for a Green New Deal, or a just transition off of fossil fuels through a 10-year mobilization of our society's resources. And it also fights for other legislative priorities that are in line with the Green New Deal, and does quite a bit of community organizing. Sunrise really believes that political power, so having elected officials who support really bold and intersectional climate action, and people power, having an active base of popular support and people who are ready to turn up in the streets, go hand in hand and are really important to combine for fighting the climate crisis. In terms of what we're working on right now, we recently launched our Good Jobs for All campaign, which is putting pressure on the Biden administration and other elected leaders across the country to invest in good, high-paying, and often union jobs, putting people to work, building a better future. So that might look like wind turbine maintenance. It might look like elder care and educational sector jobs. It might look like forest restoration. There's a whole bunch of like low carbon but very important and regenerative work to be done. And Sunrise wants the government to put people to work doing it. So that is what we're working on right now. There's a Good Jobs for All pledge, which you can find on Sunrise's website and ask your elected officials to sign on to. And there's also some critical legislation that was introduced just this week to create a civilian climate corps, which would be a federally funded jobs program, putting people to work in those jobs. And that was introduced by AOC and Senator Markey, and you should totally ask your congressional representatives to support it. And that's a little bit about Sunrise. I can talk more about policy stuff and how we organize and all that later on, but that's Sunrise in a nutshell.
Thank you so much. It's so meaningful to hear about the different outlets of community organizing that people can get involved in. So thank you for talking about this. So speaking of policy, I know we touched a little bit on different initiatives and projects that you guys are taking, but if you want to talk about maybe policies that you support right now, projects that you're working on right now, things for the future, kind of what you're excited about to get started on, and we'll do the same order. So if we want to start with Leaf again.
Yeah. So we're actually working on a couple of things this semester. One thing is that we're working with SGA to propose this thing to Hofstra in terms of changing something as an institution. Do you want to talk a little bit more about like the proposal details?
It's so, as Hofstra is a large institution, it affects us, but it also affects the community around, and we really want themselves to hold themselves accountable. And so we're hoping to propose that Hofstra try to go net zero, or at least reduce their carbon emissions by like a lot, and have the institution actually speak on about it and hold themselves accountable for it.
Yeah, so we can't talk too much about the entirety of the details, but it's not just that. There's also a lot of different things that we're asking from Hofstra. And we're working on a petition right now. We're getting the like synopsis, like description approved right now to be sent out. And we'll definitely let all of you guys know about that you guys can sign on whether you go to Hofstra or you don't. It's just for Hofstra community. So if you live around here, if you have family that goes to Hofstra, anything like that. So that's one of the bigger projects that we're working on. And SG actually reached out to us and asked for our help, which is really awesome. We're also working on getting Hofstra B certified, which is awesome because they're kind of already on the way there. There's so many bees on campus and so many plants, and that's Paige and one of our members, Aliana, that are working on that. So that's hopefully going to happen very soon. Before the pandemic, we were working with Extinction Rebellion. We were trying to get certified, like we were doing a training with them, and that kind of stopped because of the pandemic. But we had gone to a couple of their protests and demonstrations. So that's an organization that we definitely want to work with in the future. And then one of the more lighthearted kind of fun things that we're doing is a student garden. So we have a student garden on campus. And I don't know if you guys have seen it because I did not know anything about it before, but it's right next to Stuyvesant. And it's really small, and there's like a little compost turn thing as well. And I went there yesterday and we cleaned out all the beds and planted garlic and lettuce and chives. So that's going to be really cool. And in May, it should be able to be harvested. And then we're going to go out there and eat the food that we grew, which is awesome. And then one quick side note that I'm not really sure how this is going to affect Hofstra as an institution, but we're definitely going to work to help them. But I know that New York is mandating that big institutions of a certain size have to compost. So I'm not sure the details on that, but we're definitely going to work with Hofstra to figure that out because that's a great thing that's happening. So yeah, those are just some of the things that we're working on, especially also because we're a newer club. So we're trying not to overwhelm the members. Like we want to do all of these things, but like also we do want to like get this stuff picked up. So yeah.
That is awesome. I'll definitely be looking out for that petition whenever it comes around. So thank you. If you want to move on to Ashley.
Great. I love to hear that young folks are getting involved with gardening. I'm a big fan of gardening, but the deer keep eating my plants in my yard. So there's a constant war with the deer. So I want to talk about the policy that Citizens Climate Lobby is advocating for. It's called the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act. It was originally introduced in 2016, and then it got reintroduced in this session of Congress. It just got actually reintroduced on March 31st. So it's brand new in this Congress, and we're very excited that it's been reintroduced. So the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act will reduce America's carbon pollution to net zero by 2050. It puts a fee on carbon pollution, so like a carbon tax, which you guys might have heard that term before, which creates a level playing field for clean energy. And then the money collected from the fossil fuel companies from that tax goes back to Americans in the form of a monthly carbon cashback check. So everyone can afford the transition to clean energy. Something we always hear from folks is like, how are we going to afford renewable energy or a green car? And so this policy will help Americans make that transition over time. And a broad range of economists and scientists support this act because it's simple, comprehensive, and effective. So as I mentioned, it puts money in the pockets of people every month, and that money is just your money. It's kind of like the stimulus checks. You spend it how you see fit. It helps low and middle income Americans make that transition. It's also good for people because it's not just regulations at the top that then can sometimes make things more expensive overall. It is something that helps regular people make that transition. And the low and middle income Americans actually will come out financially ahead or break even because their carbon footprint is typically lower than like wealthier Americans. This policy will improve health and save 4.5 million American lives over the next 50 years because of the reductions in pollution that Americans breathe. So poor air quality, like we all know, is responsible for a lot of health problems. And you might not know, but it can be responsible for as many as 1 in 10 American deaths today due to cardiovascular issues, lung disease, asthma, all sorts of health issues. This policy is actually good for the economy too, because it's going to create job growth right here in American soil, on main streets, in hospitals, and manufacturing. So America leads the world with technology innovation. And so if this policy is in place, the government will be setting the direction, but businesses will be able to respond in order to provide abundant, affordable, and reliable clean energy. And this will drive us towards net zero carbon pollution faster. So I believe that in the chat, there's some links to the Energy Innovation Act.org website, which goes into all sorts of details about the bill. We've got an infographic so you can kind of see how it works. And one important thing I forgot to mention is that this bill has a border carbon adjustment on it, which means that if America is doing this carbon pricing legislation, then other countries that don't have something similar in place will have to pay a border tariff adjustment so that American businesses remain competitive on the world market. Interestingly, though, a lot of economists and scientists don't think that border carbon adjustment will be needed, because as soon as America passes carbon pricing legislation like this, other countries are going to jump on board or already have like maybe a carbon price in place, but it's very low. And so as soon as America starts doing things and getting our act together, the rest of the country is ready and waiting for us to do that. And so this border adjustment might not necessarily be needed. And so, as I mentioned before, we're doing a big campaign where we're asking folks to write their member of Congress. So just a show of hands, how many of you know who your US representative is, your member of Congress in the House? Okay, awesome. It's a lot of hands. Okay, so as I mentioned before, Tom Swazi and Grace Ming are both on this bill as co-sponsors, and so we're super grateful to them. They were on it in the last Congress too. Kathleen Rice was on the last Congress, but she hasn't signed on yet again, so we're trying to push her to get on board. And then, as I mentioned, the other Long Island reps are not yet on board. To kind of complement what Nina talked about, a lot of the sponsors of this legislation are also co-sponsors of the Green New Deal. So there's a lot of overlap between these sponsors, and these policies actually can complement each other. So there are things the Green New Deal would do that this wouldn't necessarily do, and there are things that this would do that the Green New Deal wouldn't do. And so we would like to see, all sorts of climate policies passed in Congress and signed by the president. And so I think about half of the sponsors on this particular Energy Innovation Act legislation are also sponsors of the Green New Deal. So it's great to see that Congress is working together in multiple ways to try and pass meaningful, effective climate legislation.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I used the CCL tool to send a letter to my representative, and it was really, really easy and took me like 2 seconds. So thank you for that.
Awesome.
So if we want to move on to Nina, maybe you could talk a little bit about Sunrise Movement policies that you're interested in.
Totally. I will start off just by giving some context and framing around what the Green New Deal is, because I think there are so many misconceptions about it out there. At Sunrise, we think of the Green New Deal as not a piece of legislation. That's not what it is. And not just a resolution either, although there is a Green New Deal resolution in Congress that was actually just reintroduced this week. We actually think of the Green New Deal as a governing agenda, or in other words, a framework for how we should govern for the next decade to combat the climate crisis and do so in a way that's fair and just and actually creates a better world and ensures prosperity for future generations. So the Green New Deal has a whole bunch of principles and values in it. The Green New Deal talks about healthcare for all, housing for all, education for all, a $15 minimum wage, and critically, jobs that enrich and support communities instead of extracting from them. So jobs that, when you go home at the end of the day, you feel like you've done something to take care of your neighbor instead of something that's maybe detrimental to your own health or to your neighbor's health, and certainly to the health of the planet. So for that reason, the Green New Deal is kind of intentionally vague, and it leaves a lot open to interpretation. The Green New Deal basically says, here's what we should prioritize, and here are the values that should be important as we govern to stop climate change. But it doesn't say these are the exact policies. So the policies are left up to us to determine. And one thing that's really exciting about this political moment is that with the reintroduction of the Green New Deal, we've also had a bunch of Green New Deal legislation introduced. And that legislation ranges from Congresswoman Jamal Bowman's 21st Century Schools bill, which would invest something like $1.7 trillion to retrofit our nation's school buildings and ensure climate education is being delivered through our public school system and ensure that the carbon footprint of our public schools is low. Legislation includes the Green New Deal for Public Housing Act, which y'all should totally look into. And it's basically about building sustainable, affordable public housing in this country through federal investment. And the one that's most exciting to me, and the one that I've touched on already, is the Civilian Climate Corps, which was proposed by Senator Ed Markey. And I will give a few more policy specifics on that because I think it's so central to what the Green New Deal is trying to do. So the CCC would employ an equitable and diverse group of 1.5 million Americans in 5 years. It would also be an intergenerational group, but we expect that a lot of young people would sign up for these jobs, and the jobs would range from things like climate resilience and conservation, sustainable infrastructure, and it would also include a lot of really important employment benefits like educational funding. So if you had a CCC job under Senator Markey's plan, you would get paid to go further your education after you were finished working. Long-term career opportunities. So there would be a significant investment in like a career pathways service for anybody employed in the Civilian Climate Corps. And then you would actually get money back from the work that you were doing. So like if you were doing work to enrich the community and that work was profitable in some way, then you would receive money directly back into your pocket. And I think that the CCC is really critical because while there's no historical precedent for fighting the climate crisis, there is historical precedent for a huge national mobilization to deal with a crisis. And so one era that Sunrise looks to a lot is the New Deal era and President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And one of the first policies that was put in place during that era was the Civilian Conservation Corps. And that policy was incredibly successful and incredibly ambitious. It also had a lot of flaws. It didn't employ women. It infringed on a lot of Indigenous sovereignty. It didn't employ people of color at high enough rates, but it is a model that we can look to as we think about how we're going to combat this crisis. And so I have been really excited to think about how we can replicate and improve upon that in our modern era. Just to contextualize further a little bit, I would say all of these policies that I've just mentioned fall under the Green New Deal umbrella. And I would say policies also like carbon fee and dividend that Ashley was just talking about also fall under the Green New Deal umbrella. So the Green New Deal is, it's a framework that will include many pieces of legislation over the next decade or so. And I hope that helps folks understand it a little bit better.
Yes, thank you so much. I love to hear about all the different stuff that's happening and everyone who's working to get it passed. So to use Callie's term, I'll now be passing my virtual mic to Antonia, who will be starting us off with the Q&A section, but also know that you can ask your own questions. Please do. We want to hear what you're thinking about. We have amazing panelists here who I'm sure would be happy to answer your questions.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Antonia. I'm another CCE fellow, and I'm going to just start off with a question that I have a lot when I hear about environmental justice is kind of like, what are the intersections between social justice and environmental justice? How have you encountered these in your work? And like, how does the climate crisis impact different communities in different ways? If you could kind of touch on that, that would be really interesting. We can start with Leaf again and just go around, I guess.
Okay, yeah. So this aspect in terms of the relation between social justice and environmentalism is a huge focus in our club specifically. And this is definitely because we have a variety of different people in our club in terms of their experience with environmentalism. So we have people who, our freshmen come in and don't know anything, but are super interested in it and they come in. And then we have grad students like Yuli, who is in this, I just saw her picture, who is extremely knowledgeable. And then we also have people who have focuses, like hers is sustainability and fashion. And then we have people who know a lot about gardening and all this stuff. So we focus a lot about how to integrate environmentalism in every part of your life, which ties into social justice, because social justice is affecting every single part of your life. And that's on racism, that's on sexism, that's on everything. And in our education, we definitely, and especially in our social media too, we focus a lot on tying those things together. Using social justice themes and using that as an opportunity to educate people about how environmentalism relates to that specific social justice theme. And I think it's also important to know that the difference between the global South and the US, and I think a lot more about that.
Yeah, so we also like to talk a lot about just communities as everyone is susceptible to climate change, but there are communities that are more vulnerable to climate change. And so we also have an emphasis on discussing environmental racism and how different communities are more vulnerable because of that. And like we recently did a presentation on ecofeminism, so we really do like to touch on every base and emphasize learning things from every facet. And the fact that social justice is so deeply ingrained and entwined with environmentalism. And so we want to focus on educate that and put our foot forward on continuing to educate others about that and, improve the conditions of everything through that.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's something that our generation has a lot to offer because we're so active in social justice and with people's specific little niche things. Like Annabelle, for example, grew up on a farm, and every time we have any questions about like food security, gardening, farming, we always go to her. And it's great because it offers us to have like expertise on something because we're students, but social justice is such a large umbrella that anybody can take part in. And as soon as people see that environmentalism connects to every single thing in their life is where change starts to happen, because it's hard for people to conceptualize something if it's not affecting them. And this is something that is so big and it is affecting everybody. So I think that there is such a strong connection between social justice and environmentalism. So we'll pass them on.
Thank you so much. That is so like inspiring to hear that there's a group of people on campus who have who understand the link between those two things and who are doing work to try and solve the problems. So if we want to go to Ashley.
Great, thanks. This question is always really challenging for me personally to answer because I'm a white woman that has a lot of privilege, and I know that. And I'm in this space, and I have a large platform because I am a white woman. And so I try to be as aware of that as possible. I could talk about the initiatives that we have going on at CCL with our diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts in terms of like things all the way from our hiring practices, where in the last year we committed to hiring 50% of our new hires as people of color. I could talk about our diversity, equity, and inclusion action teams and our trainings that we're doing because our volunteer base is largely white. And so we do a lot of educational efforts to try and bring this conversation of environmental justice and equity to make sure that our volunteers are aware of this. So those are a lot of things that we're doing as an organization, but I just want to bring in a personal experience with this, which is that while I am white and I have a lot of privilege, I grew up in West Virginia in coal mining country, which is now natural gas mining country. And so while the color of my skin doesn't set me apart in the environmental movement, I think my experience living in West Virginia until I was 22 years old and then moving to New York, really gave me insight into frontline communities. Coal mines were foisted upon us. Natural gas extraction was foisted upon us. I'm an environmentalist my entire adult life in the climate sector. And yet my parents sold our mineral rights to a natural gas company because they couldn't afford not to. I grew up on a farm like Annabelle, so that's where my love for gardening comes. I grew up hiking the Appalachian trails, camping in the Appalachian Mountains. We didn't go on vacation because we couldn't afford to when I was little, so we would go to state parks and go camping. As an adult, having my parents sell the natural gas fracking rights of my farm that I grew up horseback riding on and gardening on and just walking to the creeks and the ponds on our property, our hundreds of acres in my beautiful home state of West Virginia, having them sell that to a natural gas company was devastating to me and offensive to me. But I also couldn't be mad at my parents because they literally couldn't afford to not do this. Other farms nearby them were being sold as well. And so if they held out, they would be the last one. They would get the least amount of money. They would still get all the pollution because the pollution doesn't stay on farm borders. And so just seeing how frontline communities, whether they're communities of color or low income communities, are treated by the fossil fuel industry, it's really been something that has lit me up my entire adult life to try and combat this, because if my family, if someone like me who knows better, and my family who I like talk all the time about climate change too, and like they tell me to stop because they're tired of hearing about it, if I can't convince them not to do it because of the health impacts of natural gas fracking, because of what it's going to do to our land, because of what it's going to do to our animals on the farm, the horses that my aunt has on our property, you know, they're going to be drinking the well water that's coming with the fracking that's happening. If I can't convince my family to not do this, how is anyone else going to make the right decision on this? So this is, you know, is just a very small personal example of how frontline communities are taken advantage of. And even when they're white people, they don't often have much of a choice in the issue. And so that's where my motivation for educating people on these issues comes from. And that's where, you know, like I said, you know, I'm a white woman with a lot of privilege, but this is where my empathy comes for frontline communities, because this is something I can relate to, is being taken advantage of and not being listened to. And so that's where I try and pull from when I am engaging in conversations of environmental justice, because I can't relate to the other you know, prejudices and discrimination issues that our country deals with on a daily basis. But I can relate to being taken advantage of and relate to people on not having a choice in a lot of these kinds of matters. And so, you know, the biggest thing I've learned as I've been going on this journey in myself to find out how can I be a better ally and advocate for environmental justice is trying to find out how I can have empathy for these other communities that I don't belong to, but how can I, you know, also use my privilege to highlight these issues and maybe talk to other white people that will listen to me because they see that I'm like them, and use my platform to help educate them, and then normalize these kinds of conversations so that they're willing to listen when people of color are having these conversations as well. So I don't know if that's exactly the answer you're looking for.
Thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah.
That really shows like how broken so many of the systems in this country are and how much change is needed. Thank you so much for that. Nina, go ahead.
So Ashley, thank you so much for sharing. Yeah, that personal story. We do a lot of personal story and personal narrative in Sunrise. And I actually also have ties to coal country in Appalachia. My maternal grandparents live in a very, 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 very remote East Tennessee holler. There's like no cell service and no trash pickup, and many of their neighbors live in very poorly insulated shacks and don't have access to medical care or insurance or quality education, and yeah, and don't have stable employment. And so that place has really shaped my outlook on the climate crisis. My paternal grandparents live in a small town in northern India, and yeah, it's pretty hard to get there. Like, it's pretty far away from the nearest airport, and it's, yeah, there's a lot of poverty and there's a lot of pollution, and so that place also has really shaped my outlook on the climate crisis. In 2017, there was a forest fire near my grandparents' house in Tennessee, and then very shortly after that, there was really severe flooding in northern India. And you know, both of those things are not uncommon for those regions, but what was really eye-opening for me was to watch those two places, which have been the victims of a lot of governmental disinvestment over the past several decades, just struggle and struggle and struggle to rebuild. Because when you don't have education, when you don't have a stable income, when you have to fear your neighbor because of violence against women in both places, or because of a lot of overt racism in Tennessee, a lot of Islamophobia in India, it's really hard to be resilient after disaster strikes. And those places are still that I love so much are still struggling to rebuild from those disasters, and they will keep struggling because the disasters are not going away. They're going to get more intense. And I think they both exemplify different sides of the social justice conversation around the climate crisis, where like in East Tennessee, you know, our neighbors fly Confederate flags, and yet they're on the front lines of the climate crisis, and yet they, you know, need to be invested in as really important stakeholders in this fight. And in India, like this is a place in the global south, this is a place that is suffering the consequences of the United States's consumption and overconsumption of natural resources for decades and decades and decades. And so all of that is to say, I think, you know, for me, it's like a lot of people, when we talk about the Green New Deal, will be like, well, we can't do everything at once. And it's like, no, we actually have to. Like, there is no resilience in the face of climate disaster if we are fighting with each other along lines of class and race and religious sect and gender and sexual orientation and all these other things. Like we have to be able to come together in moments of crisis in order to withstand even the damage we already know is locked in because of climate change. And more than that, we have to make sure that the climate crisis isn't going to exacerbate existing inequalities, like these income inequalities I'm talking about, or these global inequalities of like rich countries and poor countries, to an extent that's completely irreparable, because we know whose lives will be lost first, and we know whose communities will be hit worst. And but there's not that much time to change that, but there is a little bit left. And so, yeah, I think it's just so important to center social justice in the climate fight, for a huge variety of reasons. I would also say, like, we're talking a lot about impoverished areas, but I also just want to name that like Indigenous people hold so much knowledge about how to have a regenerative model for our relationship to land, instead of like an extractive and sort of dominance and ownership mindset about it. And so much just like technical knowledge of the land in this country and in countries around the world. And so that's one of my favorite parts about the Green New Deal, is that it really explicitly states like we have to listen to that knowledge and put those communities in positions of stewardship. And also want to name that, like, yeah, air pollution and pollution in general really disproportionately harms Black communities. It's something I've seen a lot of growing up in Ann Arbor, Michigan, which is really close to Detroit and to Flint, of the Flint water crisis. And yeah, there's just so many intersections, and we absolutely need to be talking about them and thinking about them as we fight the climate crisis. So if anyone ever tells you you can't do everything at once, the answer is no, we have to do everything at once. And that's overwhelming, but it's also exciting because we can build a better future.
Wow, thank you for that. I think that's really interesting, like, to see the parallels between India and Tennessee, and like places that seem so far apart, but really are experiencing like very similar problems related to the climate crisis. So next I have a question from the chat. So just a reminder to the audience, if you have any questions, like while the panelists are presenting, feel free to chat me, or just send it like to everyone, or send it to one of the other fellows. But this says, how do you all stay motivated and positive despite the stress and burnout that can come with fighting what feels like such a large problem? So we can start with Leaf again.
I love this question because every time we plan meetings, one of the struggles in the beginning was like, okay, let's talk about environmental racism. And then we go through our PowerPoint and we're like, oh my God, that was so depressing. What do we do? Like, we don't want to just leave everybody with that. But what tends to happen every time without fail with our meetings is we'll talk about ecofeminism, we'll talk about Indigenous people, and yes, we'll recognize all of the terrible things that are going on. But the main thing, the takeaway from it, is only motivation that's left, because all of these terrible things that are happening, yes, but it also now leaves you an opportunity to fix that, and it leaves you an opportunity to do something and meaningful in the world. For example, last meeting we had Ken Young, who is an adjunct professor at Hofstra, and he is a PR person. I'm a PR major too. And he's worked a lot with the climate crisis, but in the PR industry. And he worked with Al Gore in terms of like his campaigning towards the public on his climate crisis sort of plans and stuff like that. And he came in and did a presentation on climate reality that Al Gore did, but he just kind of, condensed it down to 40 minutes. And everybody in the club was speechless at the end, because there was a lot of statistics about all the terrible things that were going on. But at the end, he showed how much progress we've made in the past couple of years as as an entire planet, not just the US. The US is actually very, very behind compared to other planets. I mean, countries, whoa. But so seeing that kind of motivates me, because although all these terrible things are happening, that's motivating me to finish my degree. It's motivating me to take this in whatever industry I go into and to educate other people, because as these things are coming more and closer to my like community and my heart, the motivation gets stronger for me. And to me, that's the positive part of it. And I know it's hard to focus on that, but that's what I remember. I don't know if you want to talk about your experience or if it's different.
Yeah, no, and like when I hear about, I mean, every day, you know, it's like a new thing that we're hearing about that's like horrible going on. And I always feel like so heartbroken and put down when I hear about things, and I'm like, wow, how can we possibly do anything about this? But then I go to meetings like this, and we have our LEAF meetings, and we talk to other climate organizers, and I just feel so inspired and such a strong sense of community after. And it's just knowing that there are communities like what we're doing right now, and like our club and like the other organizers here, is just like what gives me like a lot of hope.
Yeah, and before I pass it over to Annabelle, I also just want to quickly add, every I don't even think I've told you guys this, but every like adult or like person in the professional industry that has come and talked at LEAF after has always emailed me and been like, you give me hope. Like, you guys give me hope, because your generation is so knowledgeable and so hungry to learn and to fix the problems that you were given, because we just came here and all of this stuff was like this. So I think that's also really important to note. And Annabelle, I'm going to pass it to you.
I think another really good thing we do is set little goals and give ourselves little things we can do. So after all the things that were happening in Texas, we like told our members places they could donate money to, or like, and then after, I don't know, we just have a couple of things where if you do a tiny little thing, it makes you feel like you're doing something, but in the long run, it actually makes a really big difference. So I think that's a really good way to keep motivated, because little benchmarks along the way make you feel accomplished.
Great. Yeah, that's really great lesson. Sometimes I feel overwhelmed just as a person like living during climate change, and then I have to like remember I can't fix all of the problems. I can only do what I can do. So Ashley, you can go ahead.
Sure. So one of the common sayings we have in our organization is action is the antidote to despair. And so anytime I'm feeling overwhelmed or frustrated, which is often, I use that as a touchstone. And that's something we say regularly to our volunteers. It is such a deep held value in our organization that our monthly meetings where we have every month we have a monthly meeting where our local chapters all join a Zoom call. So we've been doing Zoom well before the pandemic and Zoom became popular. We've been doing Zoom for years because our chapters are all over the country. So once a month we have a Zoom. We hear from our executive director. We have a guest speaker from other organizations or climate scientists or economists or politicians or faith leaders, business leaders, so that we can educate ourselves. And part of that monthly meeting is to practice and to take action. So every single month, our volunteers are taking at least one action where they can actually have an impact. So whether that's writing letters to the editor to call on their member of Congress to sponsor climate legislation, whether that is writing an email or making a phone call to their member of Congress, whether that's sending a postcard to President Biden as part of our Earth Day efforts for CCL. We're constantly in action, and we're constantly supporting our volunteers and training our volunteers to take action that will have an impact. And so the overwhelm is there, and the overwhelm is constant. And the only way that I'm able to, gosh, I've been doing this for probably 14 or 15 years now. And I'm older than most of you on this Zoom, but I'm not that old. But it just feels like such a rough slog when when the climate movement, keeps having losses, and it seems like sometimes the successes just aren't enough. But the way that I stay focused is one of you said it before, to break things down into smaller tasks, to constantly take action. And then I loved how you said that other speakers come to your meetings and then say that you provide them with faith and hope and inspiration. And that was actually something I was going to say before you said that, which is that I'm constantly, anytime I'm interacting with young people, Sunrise Movement, any youth-led groups, environmental clubs on college campuses, anytime I'm interacting with groups like that, I do feel hope and I do feel refreshed and inspired to like keep slogging through the frustrating parts of climate activism. And it is because this next generation of high school and college students are so smart, are so articulate, are so, you're educating yourselves, you're joining groups, you're reading books, you're going to things like this, in your free time. And so that is really, it is really inspiring. And a lot of our volunteers at CCO, we've got a lot of people that are retired, because retired people have time to volunteer. College students don't always have time to volunteer because you're doing all sorts of things all over the place and you're, trying to get a degree. And many of you probably are working part-time or maybe even full-time. And so we've got a lot of volunteers that are retired, and I hear all of them say the same thing, which is when they interact with young people, it gives them immense hope, and it makes the years of their volunteering, because some of our volunteers have been protesting since the 70s, since the very first Earth Day. And they get immense amount of hope from the efforts that they see young folks like you doing. So keep up the work. It's hard, I'm not gonna lie, it doesn't get easier with time. But if you take action and do something on a regular basis, I think that will help you stay motivated and stay focused. So action is the antidote to despair.
Yeah, I love that saying. That's really totally encapsulates how I think we should approach this issue. Nana, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I would say so when I was 13, I was in middle school. So this is 5 years ago. I'm a high school senior now. I had this habit of going around in my middle school cafeteria, and just to paint a picture, I went to a big public middle school. Everyone in my grade ate lunch at the same time in the same room. So this is I had an audience for this, and that audience was not a friendly audience. These are 13-year-old boys, scary, very scary. I had a habit of putting on plastic gloves that the lunch ladies gave me, and then going around and taking plastic bottles out of the trash cans. They'd already been thrown away. So I was digging through the trash, taking them out and putting them in the recycling bin, which there was only one recycling bin. There were lots of trash cans, so people would just throw away their recyclables because it was easier. I did that for 2 years. As you can imagine, it made me very popular with my peers. And I realized close to the end of 8th grade that they didn't actually even recycle the recyclables. They just dumped them in the landfill with everything else for convenience, I guess. I don't really know. But I was wow, I just wasted 2 years of my life making myself known as the trash girl for no reason. And it was really depressing, but it was all that I knew how to do at that age, because from childhood, we are told that the solutions to the climate crisis are rooted in our individual habits, right? It's use a metal straw, use a reusable water bottle, carry a tote bag. By the way, all these things are kind of expensive too. They're not that accessible to poor people, low income people, and recycle. And I just would say the thing that keeps me hopeful and the thing that has helped me sustain my commitment to this work has been breaking out of that mold that I was so immersed in as a middle schooler, and as a high schooler, finding collective action, which is not only so much more capable of making the difference that we need to make, but also requires that you find a community of people who care about this as much as you, and people who share your values, and people who will hold you and carry you through these really, really scary times. And people who you can not only console yourself with after losses, but also celebrate wins with. That's so important. You have to celebrate the wins as they come. And so the friends that I've made locally and also nationally, working with Sunrise and doing other advocacy, are some of my best friends in the world, and they are such cool people, and they have helped me through so much of even just like the everyday hopelessness, but also the big moments. So I would say like that's where I find hope, is like rejecting this idea that to combat the climate crisis, we have to just change our individual habits, and embracing this idea that when we work together in groups and when we form local and national communities who are ready to take things as they come and fight this crisis head on, we can actually make the change we need to see.
Yeah,
Can I just follow up on that? I want to just highlight something that she said that I love. You know, this individual action focus was instituted by the fossil fuel movement, right? So fossil fuel companies knew climate change was happening, and they didn't want to be on the hook for it. And they knew that it was their fault. And so what they did was they started marketing campaigns to individualize this problem and to tell us that we could stop climate change by using metal straws, and not using plastic bags, and composting, and, you know, buying a Prius or whatever. And, you know, I do all those things personally, but that doesn't matter. Like, I do that so that when climate deniers are like, do you do this? Or do you have solar panels? I can say, yes, I have solar panels. But it doesn't matter. It does not matter. The metal straws don't matter. The metal straws are good because it doesn't pollute the ocean and hurt the turtles, right? Okay, but that doesn't matter in terms of climate change and fossil fuel use and our carbon footprints. So don't fall for the individual actions, like little things, as much as the collective action. Like Nina said, it really is the collective action that's going to have an impact, and the collective action of passing legislation at the federal level, and getting our leaders to take action on this. And so as much as your individual actions can focus on influencing collective action, that's where you're going to have the real power.
Yeah, that was really actually a perfect segue into my next question, which is like, what is the value of policy change on the local level versus the national level? So like, what, like, you know, our individual actions don't have a ton of impact, but like calling our local representatives versus like sending the postcard to President Biden, like what is the value of both of those things? Leaf, can go ahead.
Yeah, definitely. So I think local is, the difference for me is that local, you can see it. And I think that when a lot of our society works on supply and demand. So if there is a lot of local communities that are passing some sort of change in favor of the climate crisis, then another local community will, another one, and then it'll start building up a demand for national levels to take action. And I think that local is also, your voice is heard then. So for example, Hempstead, pretty small. I'm from Brooklyn, so I don't know too much about the specific district, but I've already seen like people talk about stuff that they want to get passed, and then it gets passed because you meet those people, you can see those people at the grocery store. So there's a lot more room for communication to those people. And once it gets into the local level, then it has room to move up to the national level. Of course, the national level is important because that can potentially give an opportunity for national regulations to happen, which is what we want, because we want things to change on an institutional level as well. But I think for us as people to have our voice directly heard, local is really important. I don't know if you want to speak more on that.
You said it. I think you said it.
But definitely Ashley and Nina, I'm sorry, how do you say your name again? I don't want to pronounce it wrong.
Naina,
they definitely want to know way more about this than us. So
I would also like to add that, like, on a local level, a lot of times you can see the reason for it. So like, I live near the Chesapeake Bay, so we struggle a lot with like sea level rise and just a whole, like, hurricanes hit us very badly. So you can like see the reason why you would want policy change, whereas someone in a different part of the country might not understand the reason as well. So it would give you more like incentive to pass the local legislation, which, as Annalisa said, would then lead to hopefully like better regulations.
Yeah, definitely. I know personally, I live like in Philadelphia, and we've had like more extreme thunderstorms and flooding like in the past 2 years than in my entire life. And it's just crazy to see it affecting me on such a local level. Ashley, you can go ahead.
Yeah, so we really view our chapters that are in, you know, local communities. We want to empower them to make relationships with our local elected leaders. You know, we're not trying to pass local policies or state policies, even although we do have, some of our CCL chapters, especially in New York, actually, we've got some CCL chapters that are trying to pass some climate legislation for the state. But for the most of our chapters, what they're doing is they're building relationships with local elected leaders to then say, like, these are going to be the local benefits of this Energy Innovation Act, of this policy. And this is going to help, you know, provide stability to your budgeting processes, because, you know, when natural disasters happen, you know, locally with flooding and saltwater intrusion on our aquifer in Long Island, you know, sea level rise, you know, communities now needing to sell their homes and move because, you know, they're too close to the flood zones. You know, this particular policy will help us with reducing carbon emissions so that these local budgets are not as severely impacted by climate disasters. And so what our local chapters do is they actually try to get their city councils, their county legislatures to pass resolutions supporting our policy. And so we have had, it's on our website, I'm just trying to find that number. We have local governments from across the country, 135 local governments and tribes that have endorsed our policy as part of like a resolution that they've passed. And some state governments, including, I think California has passed this, you know, so 7 tribal entities. So we have been trying to train our volunteers on how to pass these resolutions to support a carbon pricing legislation and or climate legislation. So when I said 135 local governments, it doesn't sound like a lot, but that's just the ones that have supported our bill. There are hundreds more that have said, have passed resolutions for climate action in general. And so again, these are resolutions, so they're not like binding or actually like have teeth or anything. But when I go to a meeting with my member of Congress, and I take a local city council person with me to that meeting, and they say, you know, the town of, you know, actually, I think Chicago passed a resolution. So if I lived in Chicago and I was going to a meeting, I could say, you know, our city of Chicago passed a resolution in support of this legislation. You know, those local elected officials coming to those meetings with me when I'm meeting with my federal elected representative or senators, have more power than I as a regular constituent have. And so our volunteers are trying to leverage relationships with people in their community. Like you said, these are the people you see at the grocery store. They're a town council person or a county legislator, but they're also like totally accessible, and like you could see them at a baseball game or, you know, at a county fair or something like that, and you could talk to them and actually have conversations with them and not have their staff rushing them off to leave. And so these are regular people in your community, but they do have power because they're an elected official. And so we try and leverage those relationships of local and state elected officials to try and influence our federal elected officials. And so, you know, that is something that a lot of our volunteers around the country, especially if they're having a hard time getting their federal elected official to move on climate change, they're then trying to work at a little bit lower levels of government to get endorsements and statements of support and resolutions passed, that then when you have local and state governments on board, the federal government is more compelled to act. And so that's how our organization is really engaging at the local and state level, is through trying to use those officials to influence our federal elected officials.
Yeah, that's really great to hear. Like kind of like a domino effect, like moving from the local level to hopefully influence change at the federal level. Nina, do you want to speak on that?
Yeah, I'll just add really briefly. I think that local policy can often serve as a really important tool for crafting national policy. Like if there's a local model that has worked really well, then it's much easier to persuade federal lawmakers to adopt something similar. So it's just really important to create those blueprints. And yeah, I think other folks have covered the topic really well.
Cool, thank you. So we have a question from Allie in the chat. she wanted to ask how the pandemic has impacted all of your efforts and if it has revealed or changed anything about your activism that maybe you were unaware of before. So anyone can jump in. We don't have to go in the order, but.
I can quickly say that what I've noticed is, I don't know if this is in correlation to the pandemic or just random timing, but our club has gotten a lot more traction all of a sudden. Like a lot of people have been reaching out to us to do work, like SGA, like you guys reached out to us, like a lot of people are reaching out to us. And I don't know if that's because with the pandemic, people have been paying more attention to, you know, social media and like researching things. So that's definitely opened up a lot more opportunities for our club. And a lot of people have been willing to come and just talk just because they want to, you know, make an impact. They want to do something. They want to talk to young people who care about stuff. So I feel like even in a way of losing a lot of personal, like in-person community, we've gained a lot of community through online and through Zoom and stuff like that. So that's definitely a pro that I have seen happen for our club specifically.
Oh, that's great to hear. If anyone else wants to jump in.
Yeah, so our organization was already pretty Zoom savvy and virtual because we're all over the country. And so that part hasn't really changed. You know, things like Earth Day, like usually I would usually be on Earth Day at Stony Brook University with their Earth Stock Festival and tabling and talking to college students and recruiting interns. And so, you know, the in-person stuff has definitely changed. We've had to you know, we would collect handwritten letters at tabling events from our volunteers, and it would be like a handwritten letter. People would fill out like a form and then write like a note to their congressperson, and then they would give it to us at a table, and then we would take them to our meetings, and we would, you know, drop a stack of 200 letters that we had collected over like the last 6 months from tabling events. And so we're not able to do that anymore because we're not doing in-person tabling. And, you know, with the pandemic, it's like, oh, do you really want to collect papers and have people touching pens? And, you know, and will the member of Congress really want to accept a stack of papers that lots of people have touched? So we've had to figure out more virtual ways to get people's attention. So that's included, as I mentioned, you know, we've got a lot of young people in our organization, but we do have a lot of volunteers that are retired because they have time. And so it's included, I'm the marketing manager for CCL. And so I do our social media. And so I've had to do a lot more trainings with our volunteers on like how to use social media because maybe they weren't using it before and now they want to you know, not only they can't, you know, handwrite a letter and hand it off for a lobby meeting in person because our lobby meetings are virtual now. So they want to know, like, how can I tweet my member of Congress, or how can I send a DM on Instagram a member of Congress to get their attention so that like I'm hitting them from all different avenues. And so I've been doing a lot more trainings in the last year on using social media to lobby Congress. And so I will just say to this attentive audience here, if you don't follow your member of Congress on your social media platforms that you're on, do it, because then you'll know what their priorities are. You'll be able to know who they value relationships with because they're posting pictures of who they're having meetings with, and they'll post videos, you know, of different legislation that they're supporting, or maybe interviews they've done on broadcast media. So follow your members of Congress on whatever platforms you're on, and slide into their DMs and ask them to do something about climate change, because they, you know, when you call them, they tally the number of phone calls they get on various issues. When you send them an email, they tally the number of contacts they get on those issues. When you send them a DM or tag them in a tweet or an Instagram post, they keep track of that information. So, you know, make sure though that whatever you do when you're contacting a member of Congress, that you say you're a constituent, and only contact your members of Congress. Because if you contact like Nancy Pelosi, she's not going to listen because she only represents California, even though she is the Speaker of the House. You know, they're only going to listen to their constituents. So follow your members of Congress on social media, because that has become a way for constituents to get to try and influence members of Congress a lot more over the pandemic. And literally 100% of members of Congress are on Twitter and Facebook and use the platforms regularly. And almost all of them are also on Instagram now, because they've seen how like AOC has been like so successful using Instagram to build community with her constituents and people around the country. And so in the last year, we've really seen a lot more lobbying happening on social media.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I didn't know that like they logged every time they're contacted about a specific issue. So I'll definitely do more reaching out now. Nina, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I'll take it a little more meta for this question about how the pandemic has changed our activism, and say, I think there were lots of little like micro examples of what happens when crisis strikes all over the world and all over the country prior to COVID-19, but we hadn't faced as much of a national emergency in a really long time. And I remember when COVID first hit, like the headlines that rolled in about the deaths in the Navajo Nation and how Indigenous people were suffering so much. I remember the headlines that rolled in about my own county and how, like, 80% of the people who were hospitalized in my county were Black people, even though that's not the population makeup of my county. We're not 80% Black. And I remember, the headlines that rolled in about people who were dying in hospital beds, and their last words were, "Who's going to pay for it?" Because they didn't have quality health insurance. And I think it was a really eye-opening moment for me and for a lot of us, that confirmed a lot of our worst fears about who is hit first and worst when crisis strikes, and also how ill-equipped our government is to show up for us in those moments. Because while other countries were getting $2,000 stimulus checks into the pockets of their citizens monthly for the duration of the pandemic, it took a long time for us to get even $600, and then a longer time for us to get even $1,400 more. And people have suffered so much in this past year, and I think it's really, I hope that it's been a wake-up call for organizers and also for the general public about what we're facing with the climate crisis. Like, we are looking at total systems collapse that disproportionately affects people who are already have been marginalized and who are already suffering. And so that's like a really scary idea, but I think it's an important one to acknowledge. And it's in a way, I guess it's a motivator of like what we're trying to stave off with climate advocacy, as well as, again, like these intersections with social justice of like, how do we make sure that it doesn't have this completely inequitable, disproportionate impact. That's a very like doom and gloom answer. I'll try to give a more positive answer as well. I think like the use of digital communication has been really wonderful, and like being pushed to figure out how to do effective recruitment over social media, and how to convene huge groups of people online, and possibly definitely more geographically diverse, and also potentially more demographically diverse groups of people using tools like Zoom is great. And it's definitely something that will need to be used in future. And so, yeah, that has been cool. But those would be my two answers about how it's changed things or what it's revealed.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I definitely think the pandemic has kind of been like a preview of what could happen if we keep letting the climate crisis go. I've heard people saying that too. There's a question in the chat. Are there any resources we can use to reach conservatives and Republicans, or like people who don't believe in the climate crisis? And what's the best way to start those conversations? So if anyone wants to jump in.
I'll jump in. I'll volunteer first, because this is actually where our organization kind of stands out. We're nonpartisan, and so that means we work with whoever's in Congress. And so in prior congressional calendars, when our bill was introduced, it was actually bipartisan, meaning that there was at least one Republican co-sponsor on our legislation. The members who were co-sponsors on our legislation in the past, though, retired from Congress, which over the last couple of decades, things have gotten very, very, very partisan in our country. So, some of those members were either like their districts were changing, like the demographics, and so they were seeing the writing on the wall that they weren't going to continue to be in Congress, or they were getting threats of being primaried from the right because they were Republicans that were willing to work on climate change. And it's just kind of frustrating, because it's like, these are the ones that are like willing to come to the table and have conversations and like put their names on legislation that is like predominantly Democrats and progressives. And then they're like, not going to stay in Congress because they're afraid they're going to lose their election, because they're going to get primaried from the right because they were talking about climate change. And so you know, we're looking for Republicans to come onto this bill now. We're continuing as an organization to lobby our Republican elected officials, and we've got a ton of trainings on our website. It's at community.citizensclimatolobby.org on how to have conversations with conservatives, ways to find common ground, and that's always when we're talking with our volunteers, that's always where we start, is like, find a way that you can connect with this person on this issue. Maybe you don't even need to talk about climate change, but you can talk about the fact that this person loves fishing and they grew up fishing, and like, that's like what they, you know, they did with their parents and grandparents, and this is what they want to do with their kids, and they're excited to take them fishing. But you know, the trout are not, you know, as common in the rivers in their state because of you know, warming temperatures, and the rivers aren't cold enough for that particular fish to flourish. And so talking about, you know, the local impacts of climate change and how people are actually seeing that impact their lives. Maybe it's gardeners and they're talking about how flowers are not blooming on the right schedule anymore, or vegetables on the right schedule anymore, and now it's just chaos. And like, when do I plant things, and are we going to get a weird freeze like late in April, and you know, is it going to destroy, you know, what I've planted in my garden? So finding whatever that hook is for them personally, that you can connect with them on, and that common ground, and then talking about those impacts, and then talking about what it is that they can do about it, and taking people that are conservative or Republicans or right-leaning to lobby meetings where you're lobbying a Republican has the biggest impact on the meeting that you could imagine. It changes the conversation. It doesn't become, you know, me, a progressive person, trying to speak Republican-ese and trying to, you know, appeal to my Republican member of Congress. It doesn't become this awkward like dance anymore. It becomes like, you know, an actual conservative talking to a conservative about the impacts they're seeing in their daily lives. And that can really change the conversation and really open a lot of doors. And so that is something that our organization does. We have a conservative caucus within CCL that consists of hundreds, maybe thousands of our volunteers that are right of center. And we give them the floor in our lobby meetings if they're in the meetings with us, because they can, when we're meeting with Republicans, because they can connect better on these issues of common ground. And we also will then, when we're talking with Republicans, you know, the one thing that they like about our policy is that it's market driven. So it does provide incentives for businesses to innovate and to do more R&D and to really change our economy from being a fossil fuel driven economy to a clean energy economy. And so when we use words like market driven and innovation, those are buzzwords that they like. And so that opens up a dialogue and a willingness to learn more and ask more questions. So it really is learning who your audience is, learning how to find common ground, learning to be a good storyteller. I think that's something that Nana brought up before, that Sunrise focuses on. That's something we focus on too. I think it's an important part of activism. And if you're interested specifically in like talking to conservatives about climate change, we've got a ton of resources on our website that I can link in a moment to direct you on that. It's definitely something that pushes you outside your comfort zone if that's not like your natural inclination, but it helps you really grow as a person. And it's really challenging, but also can be like a fun challenge if you embrace it. So if you're interested in learning how to talk to conservatives, I'll link that in the chat.
Thank you. Yeah, that was really great advice. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit. I just want to ask, like, how can college students get involved with climate organizing, either with your organizations, like with LEAF, how can Hofstra students get involved? And then with Sunrise and CCL, how can young people in general get involved? And are there any specific action items that people can take to celebrate Earth Day today? And if you want to add any links to the chat, feel free.
Yeah, so for LEAF, it's super chill. You just come to our meeting. You can we have everything on Instagram is the main platform in terms of socials that we use. So you can follow us on Instagram. I'll pop our @ in the chat. Do you want to do that?
Yeah.
So you can follow us on Instagram, and then you can DM us to be added to the email chain. So then you'll know like when we have meetings and all that type of stuff, and our group me too as well. And like I said before, there's a million of different ranges of experience that people have. So don't feel discouraged if you don't know too much, and don't feel like you won't get anything to offer if you know a lot, because you have stuff to teach us. And I also think it's important in general to note that, because we talked about how environmentalism relates to everything, that no matter what your major is, no matter what you plan to do is your career, you can bring this, and it can be through your lifestyle, it can be through the industries that you're going into.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important to remember that, yes, it's discouraging because, like we talked about, there's a lot of performative stuff with little things that you do. Metal straws, tote bags are not going to save the world, but they will serve as your little motivations as to you living better environmentally, and then take that into the industries that you're going into. So I think it's really important to, not just treat this as like, oh, this is interesting, but also treat it as a lifestyle and bring it into the professions that you're going into. That's very important. And take action on a local level, like we talked about, in your own personal life. And I think that's what you can do as a college student, just as an adult and a person in the future. So yeah.
Yeah, and also we too just like really want to provide a community and a space for people at Hofstra to come and discuss, even if it's like you're having a bad day, like we are here just to create a community of people who are like-minded or not, and to just talk about day-to-day things or national things. And so that's why, I don't know, we just have like a lot of emphasis on like education. And
yeah, and it's kind of hard because it's not discouraging, but when you meet a lot of environmentalists, you see how knowledgeable they are as people, and you're kind of like, oh, like I have a lot to learn. But that shouldn't be discouraging. Like, that's why we're creating this space, so that people don't have to feel intimidated, that they have, yes, there's so much you have to know, but you have to start somewhere. And we're trying to provide a club that is a great introduction into environmentalism, so that when you leave Hofstra University, you have a little bit of a background and you have connections to people, you have resources. So I think that that's really important. And going to stuff like this, like just doing what everybody here is already doing now and continuing that into your adulthood, I think is super important. So
great, thank you. Ashley?
So send a postcard to President Biden today. I'm going to put the link in the chat again. It's using an app on your phone. So it's a photo postcard, and you get a $3 credit, and the postcard only actually costs like $2.50. So you can have 50 cents for a postcard you want to send to your friend, or maybe something to your mom for Mother's Day. I would also encourage you to join CCL if you're interested. You can just sign up for our mailing list at cclusa.org/join. And you can find out when our Long Island chapter meetings are. So something I didn't really talk a lot about was the Long Island chapter, but we meet on a monthly basis. And so if you're interested in adding another meeting to your schedule, definitely join us. And we are also really focused on relationships, and I've made so many good friends from my activism, some of my best friends now that I am closest to, because I talk about climate change all the time. And those are the only ones that want to listen to me, are the ones that are also involved. So staying involved as much as you can as you leave college with local groups, whether it be Sunrise or CCL or other organizations, can help you just have ties to the community, which are really important, as you move on from college, when, you're like, okay, I've moved, I have a different life now, I have a job, and now I have no friends in this area because I'm new here or something. So joining local groups can be really great ways to build relationships. Write your member of Congress, call your member of Congress. We have a monthly calling campaign where we send you a text reminder to call your member of Congress, and you get like a little script on your phone. You just click the link and you get the script, and it says like, oh, I'm calling about the Energy Innovation Act, and I'd like you to sign on, and here's why it's important to me. And then you tap that you made your call, and then we record that. So it's a really easy, like literally 2-minute thing you can do once a month to keep the drumbeat of calls happening in Congress. So I can put a link to that in the chat too. So also follow us on social media. We are going to be running some Instagram contests in the weeks to come. So I'm giving you guys a spoiler alert where people can win cash. So follow us on Instagram and engage with us there. And I am looking for an intern for the summer that what can help me with marketing and social media and videos. So if that sounds interesting to you, application deadlines are April 30th. And that can be found on our website. I'll put the link in the chat too. But just thank you so much for this opportunity. And you know, again, like you all give me hope. So this has been good for my soul today.
Oh, great. That's so good to hear. Thank you for all those resources. Nana, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll be super quick. You should totally join Sunrise. It is an amazing community, and we are shaping federal policy at some of the highest levels, and it's just awesome. And so yeah, you can, I just dropped the link in the chat. It's sunrisemovement.org. And you can see a whole bunch of options for taking action. Also highly recommend following Sunrise on Instagram. Sometimes we do cool things and go live with celebrities and post lots of educational content and post action alerts. So yeah, join Sunrise. And to celebrate Earth Day, take care of yourself and talk to someone about the Green New Deal or the carbon fee and dividends, or just anything that you heard today that you enjoyed. And thank you for having me.
Great. Well, we are right on time for the end. Thank you to all of our panelists. You guys, this was really engaging and informative. Thank you all for taking time out of your day to talk to us. And yeah, for everyone else at Hofstra, we have 2 more panels coming up later in the day. So feel free to check those out. And thank you again. Yeah, I guess, bye.
Thank you, everyone.